"You're not allowed in the house until you apologize." That sentence, that voice, that moment, it didn't come with screaming or slammed doors. It came with polite finality, like a verdict already printed, folded, and handed to me. I stood on the front porch of what was supposed to be my home. 42 years, 1 marriage, 2 children, and countless Thanksgivings later. And listened to my daughter-in-law say it without blinking. No raised voice, no emotion, just a line she'd clearly rehearsed. I turned to my son, expecting something. Anything. A shrug, a cough, a protest, even a glance of shame. But Sam just stared at the floorboards like the wood grain had suddenly become fascinating. His arms were crossed. He said nothing. "I brought over the photo boxes," I said. "The ones from the attic. You said you wanted to go through them. You went through our things, Mom." June interrupted without asking. "Our things." I looked down at the 2 old boxes on the porch, my husband's old army uniform, baby pictures of Sam and Ellie, my late mother's letters, all stored in my attic in my house. No, our house, I suppose. Ever since Sam started paying the property taxes 10 years ago, and we'd put the title in both names for legal convenience, I hadn't thought much of it then. I just buried Walter, and Sam said it would make things easier. The kind of easier that doesn't feel like betrayal. Until it's too late. "I wasn't snooping," I said quietly. "I was preserving that uniform. Walter kept it clean for 40 years. I thought Ellie might want it." June laughed. Short, breathy, sarcastic. "Ellie doesn't even remember your husband. She was 6 when he died. And don't act like you're the guardian of family history just because you hoard dusty boxes." Sam still hadn't looked up. I picked up one of the boxes and gently pushed it forward with the toe of my shoe. "I'll go," I said, "but I'm not apologizing for remembering the people who loved me." June crossed her arms. "Then you're not welcome back until you do." It was late afternoon. The street was quiet. That odd silent suburbs get in mid-August when school hasn't started yet. But summer feels tired. I bent down slowly, knees creaking like floorboards, to pick up the other box. Not a word from Sam. Not a flicker. As I stepped down off the porch, I caught sight of the window to the front room, the place where Walter used to sit with his crossword and a bowl of peanuts. The curtains had changed, the furniture, too. Nothing left of him in there. I walked back to my car. It was still parked in the same driveway I'd pulled into every day for 4 decades. Still under the maple tree we planted. When Sam turned 10, I didn't cry. Not when I backed out. Not when I passed the mailbox I used to decorate for Christmas. Not even when I saw the hydrangeas Walter planted for me, blooming beside the fence, blue as ever. I didn't cry. But something in me, something hard and patient, shifted. By the time I turned onto the main road, I'd already decided they wouldn't need to worry about barring me from the house because by that evening, it wouldn't be their house anymore. And that's how it started. Not with a blowout or a dramatic revelation, but with a sentence, spoken on a porch by someone who thought kindness was optional after a certain age. They were wrong. I may be 76 years old, but I still know how to take a deep breath, draw a line, and walk across it. And I was about to. The kitchen felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. It was too quiet, too neat, like a stage set built to look like someone lived here. But no one actually did. I set the boxes on the table, then just stood there for a minute, holding the edges like I might lift them again or push them away or scream into them. I did none of that. Instead, I sat down in the chair closest to the window, the one that still creaked the way Walter's knees used to. Outside, the backyard looked unchanged. Same overgrown lavender, same patch of grass where Sam had once built a treehouse with his father. Now the tree stood alone, stripped of its wooden limbs, as if it had outlived its purpose. I reached into the box and pulled out a photograph. Sam, 10 years old, smiling so wide-eyed. Think he had no room for sorrow. A tooth missing, one sock up, one down. My handwriting on the back. Sam's birthday. Chocolate cake. Windy day. I'd held on to these little things for decades, not because they were valuable, but because they were proof. Proof that I'd been here, that I'd loved, that I'd worked and cooked and cried and paid bills and patched holes and stayed through every long night of fevers and fights and fear. And today, all of that had been reduced to a sentence. You're not allowed in the house. I went to the cabinet and made myself tea. Habit more than need. The kettle hissed and I stared at the flame, watching it flicker, like a question I hadn't yet dared to ask. When Walter died, it was sudden, a stroke. One moment he was beside me, sipping soup and reading aloud some ridiculous news article, and the next he was slumped over, his spoon clattering against the bowl. I'd held his hand as the ambulance came. I never forgot how cold it got in the room after they took him, as if grief itself changed the air. In the months that followed, I was a shadow. People came, people left. Casseroles appeared and disappeared. Sam helped with the bank forms, the insurance, the taxes. He was good then, thoughtful. Or maybe I just needed him to be. The house became quieter, not empty, just thinner, like the walls had let go of their breath. I started teaching part-time again, volunteering at the library, knitting for the NICU at the local hospital. I kept moving. I didn't know what else to do. Then June came into the picture. Beautiful, competent, the sort of woman who never forgot a birthday but always forgot to listen. From the beginning, she treated me like a temporary inconvenience, a holdover from an earlier version of Sam she was trying to erase. I tried to be kind. I stayed out of their way. I never commented on the decorating choices, not even when she painted over the mural Walter had spent 3 weekends working on for Ellie's nursery. I swallowed it all because Sam looked happy, because Ellie was small, because I believed that one day kindness would be enough. But kindness isn't a contract. It doesn't get you anything in writing. And apparently, it doesn't even get you through the front door. I took my tea back to the table and stared again at the boxes. Each object inside them had a weight, a cost. I knew I wasn't just looking at keepsakes. I was looking at evidence, at everything I'd paid into this life, into that house, into them. And they wanted an apology for what? For keeping a record, for refusing to vanish quietly. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I froze for a second, then stood. It was Donna, my neighbor for nearly 3 decades, the one who still brought me tomatoes in the summer and called me Marty like we were still 25. I saw you come home, she said, holding out a small box. Peach cobbler just made. It. Donna, I said, my voice suddenly unsteady. You always show up when the world goes to hell. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp. You look tired. I am. Want to talk about it? Not yet. She nodded. Well, eat. Then talk in that order. I took the cobbler, set it on the counter, and watched her walk back across the lawn. I had one message, waiting on the answering machine from Ellie. "Hi, Grandma. Dad said you weren't feeling well. Just wanted to say I love you. Call me if you need anything. Not feeling well." I laughed. It was a quiet, bitter sound. They were rewriting the story already. Too bad for them. I still own the pen. Walter and I bought this house in the spring of 1981. It cost more than we could afford and had less space than we wanted. The plumbing hissed. The roof leaked in the southeast corner, and the porch sagged like it had something to confess. But it was ours. We signed the papers with shaking hands and a giddy kind of fear, the kind that comes with doing something reckless and necessary. He carried me over the threshold like fools in a movie. We hadn't even unpacked the dishes yet. The kitchen linoleum was already peeling back at the corners, and I remember Walter crouching down with a hammer, trying to nail it. Flat as I stood there with a grocery bag full of canned soup and a bottle of cheap wine. He looked up at me and said, "We'll fix this place, Marty. We'll fill it with our lives." And we did. I found that memory buried in a small, stained notebook in the bottom of one of the boxes. Walter used to write down his to-do lists in it like a man preparing to live forever. Tighten laundry room valve. Replace porch rail, oil gate latch, and underneath it all in smaller, almost embarrassed handwriting, plan anniversary weekend. Call florist. I closed the notebook and stared at the walls of the kitchen. Nothing here was beautiful. Not by magazine standards, but every inch was ours. The scratch in the tile by the stove where Sam dropped a cast iron pan. The mismatched knobs on the pantry that Walter found at a garage sale and insisted had character. The sunlight hitting the table just right at 4:10 p.m. every day of the year. These weren't decorations. They were evidence. I was here. I lived here. And now they wanted to evict me from my own life like I was a guest who overstayed her welcome. When Sam was 9, he broke his arm, falling off the backyard swing. Walter was working late that night and I carried him to the car, wrapped his arm in a towel, and drove 45 minutes to the nearest ER that took our insurance. I sat with him all night reading jokes from a dog-eared highlights magazine while he cried into my sweater. Sam doesn't remember that night. Or he does and pretends not to. What he does remember is that I kept too many boxes, wore old shoes, and didn't understand how iPhones worked. Somewhere along the way, I went from being the sun to being an obstacle. I thought I'd been careful. I thought I'd adjusted my orbit to give him space. But I see now I was always going to be too much, too present, too inconvenient. The legal paperwork was still in the side drawer of my desk. Title held jointly, Tenny in common, signed and notarized. It was supposed to make things easier. After Walter died, Sam offered to help with taxes, and I was too tired to argue. The lawyer said it was fine, that I'd retain full usage rights, that nothing would change. And for a while, it didn't. Then came the renovations, Sam's suggestion. The kitchen needed modernizing. The paint was depressing. And he knew a contractor. I paid for half, then more than half, then all of it. I remember thinking, he'll visit more if it feels like home to him. Turns out he wasn't building a bridge. He was building an alibi. When I brought up selling the house last year to downsize, move somewhere smaller, maybe a community with other women my age, Sam said no, too risky, too much change. He said it would complicate inheritance. He said I was safe here. Funny. Safe. I'd never thought of safety as a cage until then. I looked around the room again. The table was nicked and stained and slightly uneven, but it was where we'd played 1,000 rounds of dominoes. The curtains were old, the stove temperamental, and the floorboards creaked in patterns I knew by heart. This house didn't need saving. It needed letting go. I stood up, walked to the drawer, and pulled out the paperwork, the notary seal, the property ID, the contact card from the realtor Sam once recommended. But I never called. I laid it all out on the table beside the untouched peach cobbler. I didn't need their permission. I only needed my own. The banker's name was Hal. He had a young man's face with an old man's politeness. And when I walked into the branch that morning, wearing the same coat I'd worn to Walter's funeral, he stood up like I was someone important. "I'd like to make some changes regarding the deed of my property," I told him. "And I'd prefer to speak to someone with a clear understanding of joint ownership law in Oregon." He blinked once, then nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Ellis. Let's step into the conference room." I'd come prepared. Original title, copies of the last 5 years' tax documents, letters from the insurance agency, and the revised property assessment they'd sent after we added the new siding. Another gift from Sam, which I paid for in full. Hal reviewed everything slowly, methodically, like someone checking the weight of each word before saying it aloud. When he reached the line that named Sam Ellis as co-owner, he paused and looked up. "Has there been a disagreement?" he asked. "Not really," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "Just clarity." "Right." He tapped a few keys on his computer, adjusted his glasses, and kept his tone even. "You own the house as tenants in common. That means your share is yours to do with as you like. You can sell your interest or the entire property if the other party agrees, or you can take legal steps if they don't." I smiled thin and practiced. "I have no interest in a fight, Hal. I just want to sell the house. And your son, will he sign off?" I slid a paper across the table. "Here's a record of every mortgage payment I've made since Walter passed. Here's the home equity loan I took out to pay for Sam's graduate degree. Here's the agreement where Sam and I agreed in writing that I had the right to remain in the house until my death or sale, whichever came first." Hal scanned the document. "That clause helps. Technically, if you decide to sell, he can't prevent it. He can object to the valuation, but not the sale itself." I nodded. "Then I want a full valuation. As soon as possible. I'll pay whatever it costs to get it expedited." Hal scribbled notes. "There are some good appraisers I can recommend. But just to be clear, you're planning to sell your family home." "I'm not selling a house," I said. "I'm selling the right to erase me from my own life." He looked up again, but didn't say anything. "Howell," I said, "have you ever walked through your kitchen and realized every drawer has been rearranged by someone else?" He blinked. "Have you ever sat at your own table and felt like a guest?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I left the bank with a list of appraisers and a date set for Friday, 2 days from now. I walked to the coffee shop across the street and sat by the window. Ordered tea, though it was too hot for tea. Watched the cars pass. A notification buzzed on my phone. A text from Sam. "Ellie wants to stop by this weekend. She misses you. Can you please not make things awkward?" No apology. No question of how I was. Just a request that I play nice. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my contacts and found the name of a lawyer, Walter, and I had used to draft our first will, Marshall. Graham, still in business, according to the website, the receptionist answered. On the second ring. Graham and Bell Law. My name is Martha Ellis, I said. I'm making changes to my estate, and I'd like to ensure the process is swift and irreversible. She hesitated. Irreversible? I'm not interested in second chances, I said. Just clean ones. We scheduled an appointment for Monday. Back at home, I sat in the kitchen again, looked at the boxes, the notebook, the photographs. They said I had to apologize if I wanted back into the house. They never imagined I'd sell it instead. I didn't hear from Sam the next day. Not a call, not a text. Silence. I suppose he assumed I'd gone off to sulk, that I'd spend a few days stewing in my guilt before creeping back with some sort of apology. He always underestimated how long I could sit still and how deeply I could mean a thing once I'd said it out loud. But it was never really about the house. It was about the shift, the slow, quiet erasure that begins with tiny dismissals. Being talked over at the dinner table, excluded from planning trips, having the remote yanked from your hand like your preferences expired the same year your driver's license started showing. Wrinkles. That's what June never understood. I didn't resent her because she was organized or opinionated or controlling. I resented her because she thought I didn't notice the ways she rewrote the room, the ways she moved family pictures off the shelves and replaced them with neutral art, the way she called the kitchen her space, even though I'd baked 400 loaves of banana bread on those counters before she ever stepped inside. She had Sam on a leash, but it wasn't forceful. It was soft, guilt-ridden. She didn't say, "Don't listen to your mother." She said, "I'm just trying to make things easier for everyone." And Sam, God help him, mistook that for kindness. The first real wedge came 5 years ago. Ellie had just turned 16, and I offered to help with her first car. Something small, used, safe. I'd tucked away savings from a side job I took organizing the library's archives. I told June about it over coffee. She smiled politely and said, "Thank you, Martha, but we're teaching Ellie the value of earning things," which would have been noble if they hadn't bought her a brand new Honda Civic the next week as a surprise. I wasn't angry that they didn't need my money. I was angry they didn't want my help. Walter used to say that people stop listening to their mothers the moment they find someone who flatters them more effectively. And I suppose he was right. June knew how to praise. She knew how to say, "You're so smart and you're such a provider," with just the right lilt in her voice. Sam beamed under that light, like a sunflower. And me. I was the shade. I stopped bringing baked goods to their house. They never got eaten. I stopped offering to babysit when Ellie was in middle school. They hired someone more structured. I stopped giving birthday presents they hadn't already picked out themselves. And each year, the space I occupied got smaller, my opinions quieter, my role dimmer until it shrank to a single word. Apologize. For what? For caring too much, for holding on to things they wanted forgotten. No, thank you. The appraisal team came on Friday morning. 2 women, efficient, polite, a little too formal, but they moved through the house with reverence, not judgment. One of them paused in the hallway, looking at the photo of Walter in his uniform. "Your husband?" she asked. "Yes. Passed in 2009. She nodded. "He has kind eyes." That was the first kind thing anyone had said to me in weeks. They finished quickly, took their notes, and promised a report by Monday. The same day, I'd see the lawyer. That evening, I made a pie for no reason, just for me. Blueberry, Walter's favorite. I ate one. Slice warm from the oven, standing barefoot in the kitchen, the smell of sugar and lemon filling the house like a hymn. And for the first time in years, I didn't set a second plate. June never shouted. That was her genius. Her sharpness came dressed in pleasantries, her cuts wrapped in silk. It was never "you're not welcome here." It was "maybe you'd be more comfortable at home." Never "we don't want your opinion, but let's keep things simple this time." The first time I truly understood what she thought of me was the Christmas after Ellie turned 11. I'd spent a week knitting a scarf. Soft gray wool, delicate lace work, a pattern I'd memorized in the 80s. Ellie opened it, blinked, and smiled politely. Before she could say anything, June laughed and said, "Grandma loves her little projects, doesn't she?" Just like that, the gift became a curiosity, a relic, something quaint and outdated. That night, I found it draped over the back of a chair, forgotten. I never knit for them again. There were other moments, hundreds of them. Quiet slights that don't bleed but bruise just the same. Once she corrected my grammar mid-sentence while I was reading aloud a letter from Walter. Another time she rolled her eyes when I brought my own pie to Thanksgiving. Claimed it might have too much sugar for Ellie. Subtle things designed to sound like help, designed to shrink me without confrontation. And Sam. He always laughed nervously, changed the subject, or said things like, "She means well." But I knew what it was. You can feel when someone is waiting for you to stop being needed. I tried to convince myself it was generational, that she simply didn't understand what it meant to carry a household in your hands for 40 years, that she wasn't malicious, just different. But even that excuse wore thin because at some point it stopped being forgetfulness. It became eraser. I used to have a chair in their living room, not fancy, just an old armchair they took from my den when they wanted a cozy reading nook. I'd sit in it during visits, usually quiet, watching Sam and Ellie argue about college or laugh over a show I didn't know. One day I came over and it was gone. When I asked where it went, June smiled and said it didn't really match the new layout. She offered me a seat at the counter instead, on a bar stool with no back. I sat for 5 minutes, then said I was tired and left early. They never asked why. That's how it goes, you see. Not with fights, but with replacements. Your chair, your casserole, your traditions, your space, one by one, quietly phased out. And when you finally speak up, when you say, "This hurts," or "I don't feel welcome," they look at you like you're the one who changed. They said, "I overreacted." They said, "I misunderstood." But when I dropped off those photo boxes, the ones they claimed were taking up too much space, and found myself locked out of a house I paid for, all the illusions snapped. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was an eviction, not from the property, but from the narrative. I wasn't the matriarch anymore. I was an inconvenience they didn't know how to discard politely. So they tried to starve me out with silence and suggestion. And when that didn't work, they gave me a condition: apologize. I suppose they thought I'd be afraid to lose the last bit of belonging I had. But that was their mistake. I never feared losing my place in their home. What I feared was losing my place in my own story. And that fear was gone now. I woke at 4:43 a.m. No alarm, no noise. Just the kind of waking that comes when something inside you has already made up its mind while you were sleeping. The house was dark, and the air had that pre-dawn stillness, where the silence is heavier than usual, like it knows something's about to shift. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, feet planted on the floor, waiting for my hands to stop trembling. They never did, but I stood anyway. I didn't make coffee, didn't turn on the radio like I usually did. I just walked slowly to the back door, stepped out onto the porch, and listened. The neighbors' wind chimes were moving without wind. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The street lamps blinked their last few moments before daylight made them irrelevant. I remember Walter once told me, there's a difference between giving up and deciding you're done. He said it after quitting a job that had chewed him up for 20 years. I didn't understand him then. I do now. I wasn't giving up on my family. I was just done auditioning for a role they never intended to cast me in. The realtor called at 9 a.m. sharp. I'd found her online the night before. Middle-aged, confident smile, not overly cheerful. Her name was Caroline Price. And when I told her I needed someone who didn't flinch at complex situations, she simply said, "When can I see the property?" By noon, she was standing in my living room, clipboard in hand. "This is a good space," she said, walking from room to room like a woman who'd seen 1,000 kitchens and could tell within seconds if they held memories or just meal plans. Solid bones. The sightings knew, I see. "Last year," I said, "paid in cash." She nodded. "You're serious about selling?" "As serious as cancer," I said before I could stop myself. She looked at me carefully, but didn't pry. "You'll want a pre-inspection. I've got a guy. We can have photos taken next week. I'll list it quietly at first. Test the market. Unless you want an open house right away." "No open house. I want buyers who ask for it, not strangers looking to poke through my drawers." She smiled faintly. "Understood." As we went over paperwork, I caught myself glancing around the living room. It was clean, but lived in. Nothing trendy, nothing curated, just pieces of a life. A life that, until a week ago, I thought I'd finish here. But I wasn't staying out of stubbornness. I wasn't staying out of pride. I'd simply assumed I had more time to be needed, time to matter. Caroline asked if there were any restrictions she should know about. Title conflicts, debts, family disputes. I told her everything about the joint ownership, about Sam, about the clause that protected my right to sell. Her pen paused just slightly when I said his name. "He know you're listing it?" "Not yet." She didn't say anything, just wrote down her phone number and slid it across the table. "You call me," she said, "the second he does." That night, I began packing. Not everything, just one box. I labeled it things that belonged to me. Inside I placed Walter's wristwatch, a photo of us in the first year of marriage, his eyes still reckless, mine still certain, a book of poems I never lent to anyone, and the key to a house I was ready to let go. Caroline returned Monday morning with a man named Greg. Late 40s, soft-spoken, carried a leather-bound notebook instead of a clipboard. Pre-inspection, he said, shouldn't take more than an hour. I gave him free run of the place, watched from the kitchen as he moved quietly through the rooms, tapping walls, checking under sinks, testing the outlets like he was reading the pulse of the house. I tried to keep myself busy, wiped down the stove, folded a dish towel twice, but nothing felt real. It was like watching a version of my life being quietly disassembled. Each step he took loosened another thread, not violently, gently, as if the house had already started letting go of me. Caroline sat at the table sipping coffee I'd brewed out of habit. "I've got a couple in mind," she said. "He's a retired firefighter. She's a school nurse looking to downsize, but not too Much. They have children. 2 grown. Visit once a month. They said the kind that still sends cards. I smiled at that. She looked around the room. Places like this are rare now. Houses with stories. Buyers feel it the moment they walk in. Sometimes stories wear people out. I said, my son's wife thinks history makes things cluttered. Caroline set her cup down gently. Well, history is what makes homes sell. Greg came back in with his checklist. A few notes. Nothing serious. The foundations sound. Roofs. Solid. Minor caulking in the upstairs bath. Easily fixed. Caroline smiled. We'll list it by Thursday. Quietly, like you asked. If the right offer comes, you ready to move fast? I looked around the kitchen, at the window where Walter used to stand on Sunday mornings drinking orange juice, at the spot near the stove, where the tile cracked when Ellie dropped my wedding china, at the cupboard with the loose hinge I'd never fixed because it never seemed urgent. I'm ready. After they left, I walked through each room alone, not to grieve, just to see them. The living room still smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. The hallway light still flickered when the dishwasher ran. In the back bedroom, I found a single slipper under the bed, one of mine, mismatched. I sat on the floor and held it like it was a photograph. It hit me then, not as a thought, but as a knowing. I had loved this house harder than anyone else ever would. That evening, I got a text from Ellie. Hey, Grandma. I was thinking, can I come by this weekend to grab those old yearbooks you mentioned for a school project? I stared at the screen a long time before typing back. You're always welcome, sweetheart. Just don't wait too long. I didn't tell her the house might not be mine by then, not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't want her to carry the guilt her parents had earned. I turned off the phone and pulled another empty box from the closet, labeled this one, going forward. Inside, I put the deed. Caroline called on Wednesday afternoon. You're not going to believe this, she said, and I could hear the restrained excitement in her voice. I had a couple tour the place this morning. I know we weren't doing official showings yet, but they insisted. They'd seen the outside over the weekend and were already in love, and they made an offer, full price, no contingencies, cash. I said nothing at first, just stared at the corner of my table where the varnish had worn thin from years of elbows and coffee cups and slow breakfasts. Caroline continued, softer now. They're from out of state, Oregon natives originally. Their son died 2 years ago, only child. They've been looking for a place that feels like it held something real, not new, not staged, lived in. The words moved through me like warm water. How soon would they want to close? I asked. End of the month, if you're willing. That gave me 2.5 weeks. I nodded before realizing she couldn't see me. Yes, I said. Let's do it. The next day, she sent over the documents for review. I sat at the kitchen table with the manila envelope unopened for nearly an hour before slicing it open with the same knife Walter once used to trim rose stems. The purchase agreement was clean, clear, firm, and my signature would unfasten 42 years in the space of 2 pen strokes. I signed. I didn't cry. Instead, I went to the hall closet and pulled out the box labeled things that belonged to me. I added 3 more items. A grocery list in Walter's handwriting. A cloth napkin with a stain that never came out from the last family dinner, before Ellie left for college. The key to the garden shed he built with his own hands. Then I opened a new box, labeled it, not coming with me, and into it went the live laugh love wall hanging. June insisted on gifting me the apron Sam bought from a big box store with a price tag still dangling. A candle in a scent I hate but pretended to like because Ellie picked it out. That night, I made soup. Simple, quiet soup. No need for extra portions, no thoughts of who might drop in. I lit a candle, not the gifted one, and sat at the table with my own damn book. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer it, but when I opened the door, Ellie stood there. Hoodie pulled over her head, hair in a bun, her face tired, but kind. "Hey, Grandma," she said. "I know I should have called. I just didn't feel like talking to anyone but you." I stepped aside to let her in. "Yearbooks?" I asked. She smiled. "That and everything else." We sat at the table for an hour. Two. She asked about Walter, about the house, about the old recipe box she used to dig through as a child. I let her talk, let her feel it. Eventually, she looked around and said, "Is it weird that I feel more at home here than I do with them?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "No, sweetheart," I said. "It's not weird at all." She never asked why some of the pictures were missing from the walls. Maybe she already knew. The house didn't resist the packing. I thought it might. I thought the walls would feel heavier, the drawers stiffer, that every item would whisper, "Don't go," as I touched it. But no, everything yielded without protest. Like even the house knew it was time. I started in the linen closet, old towels that had faded to softness, sheets worn thin in the middle. I kept 3 sets, donated the rest. There was no one left to impress. With matching pillowcases anyway. The kitchen was harder, not because of the things, but the rituals. The chipped teapot Walter gave me on our 10th anniversary. The casserole dish I used for every holiday. A drawer full of plastic containers with missing lids. These weren't just utensils. They were scaffolding. The structure I leaned on to make life look ordinary even when it wasn't. I gave myself permission to cry once, kneeling on the kitchen floor, holding a coffee mug that still had the faint outline of Walter's thumb print in the glaze. He used that cup every morning. I never washed it too hard, afraid I'd scrub him off. I wrapped it in a towel and placed it gently in the box labeled Mornings. I hired a mover, small local company. 2 men in their 30s. One had a back brace and called me ma'am until I asked him not to. They were kind, careful, and fast. Didn't ask questions when I pointed to the stack of boxes marked storage only. They loaded the furniture. I kept a rocker, a narrow desk, my favorite reading chair, and left the rest for donation pickup. I hadn't told Sam yet. Not officially. He hadn't reached out since the text about Ellie visiting. Maybe he thought silence was safer. Maybe he hoped I'd let it pass, chalk it up to hurt feelings, and fade back into my corner of the family. But the family had shifted. Not because I left, because I stopped asking for a seat. The new place was smaller. A little rental cottage on the edge of town with 1 bedroom, a modest porch, and a garden overrun with rosemary. The moment I stepped inside, it smelled of old books and cedar. I loved it. Instantly. No one had died there. No one had argued about dinner or disinvited a mother from her own kitchen. It was clean, honest, empty, and mine. The first night I sat on the porch with a mug of chamomile, watching the wind move through the rosemary bush like it was brushing hair. There were no street lights, just moonlight and shadow. I didn't feel sad. I felt still, like all the noise had stepped outside to give me room. The phone buzzed on the table beside me. I reached for it without urgency. Ellie, Dad saw the listing today. He's losing it. Wants to talk. What should I say? I stared at the message, then typed nothing. Let him feel what he made. I set the phone down and let the wind keep moving. Ellie came again the following Saturday, this time with a paper bag full of scones and a carton of orange juice. For your fridge, she said. It looks empty. It is, I replied. But on purpose. She sat at the little table near the front window, eyes scanning the space. It's cute, she said. Quiet. Smells like books and salt. That's the cedar shelves. In the old heating vent. I smiled. It'll settle. Ellie hadn't mentioned the house. Neither had I. We talked about her classes, her internship, the boy she liked but wouldn't admit to. I let her lead the pace, sensing she needed the normally more than I did. But after a while, she looked down at her juice and said quietly, "They're angry, Grandma. Really angry." Who? Dad. Mom. Mostly Dad. They're saying it's not fair that you blindsided them. That you're being dramatic. I nodded, sipping my tea. They're entitled to their feelings. But Ellie looked up. Aren't you going to explain? Like, tell them why? I leaned back in my chair. Ellie, your father doesn't want an explanation. He wants me to undo something that makes him uncomfortable. That's not the same thing. She looked pained. He says you're trying to hurt him, that you're punishing him. I looked at her carefully. Sweetheart, if I were trying to punish him, I'd have left him with the property taxes. Ellie laughed. The kind of laugh that catches in your throat. The kind that means you're not sure if it's okay to find something funny. I reached across the table, took her hand. I didn't do this to punish anyone. I did it to stop punishing myself. Her eyes filled a little, but she blinked quickly. There's something else, she said, pulling a folded envelope from her bag. It came in the mail to the old house. Mom didn't want to bring it, so I took it. I opened it carefully. It was a final notice from the bank, confirmation of sale, record of transaction, and a verification form for transfer of funds, and attached a small post-it note in a script I didn't recognize. We wish you peace in whatever comes next. I folded the letter back up and set it aside. Will you tell them where the money's going? Ellie asked softly. Not unless they ask. And if they do, I'll tell them what's theirs. Nothing more. Later that afternoon, we walked through the garden behind the cottage, overgrown, fragrant, alive. Ellie picked a handful of rosemary sprigs and tied them with a ribbon from her backpack. For your new kitchen, she said. I placed them in a glass jar by the window beside the pie plate and the old-timer Walter used to wind. And that night, I called the bank. I'd like to open a trust, I told the manager. For my granddaughter, full amount, long-term interest, and protected. He asked if I wanted to add any stipulations. Just one, I said. She never has to ask anyone's permission to use it. The first message came at 8:17 a.m. Sam. Mom, I saw the listing. We need to talk. Then came a call. I let it ring and ring and ring. By 98, he'd left a voicemail. Hi, Mom. Look, I don't know what's going on. You can't just sell the house. That was the family home. My home. You didn't even discuss it with me. Please call me back. By noon, the messages turned sharper. You're being irrational. This isn't like you. What are you trying to prove? And then the one that said everything without saying much at all. You've really disappointed me. I sat on my small porch with a mug of lukewarm tea, rereading that line, not in anger, not even sadness, just clarity. Because what he meant was, you didn't stay in the box we built for you. You climbed out without permission. I didn't reply. By evening, June had joined the chorus. She sent one long structured message like she was writing a formal complaint. We understand you're hurt, but decisions like this affect everyone. You could have involved us in the process. You've destabilized the family structure and created confusion for Ellie. We expected more from you. I laughed out loud. Not bitterly, not cruelly, just honestly. The family structure they spoke of had been one way for years. A bridge with tolls only going in my direction. They'd never asked what I needed, how I felt, if I was happy. They'd assumed silence meant contentment, that presence meant approval. But I wasn't a statue in the family photo. I was a person, and for once, I had acted like one. I ignored June's message, too. Later that night, as the wind picked up outside and the cottage windows creaked gently in their frames, my phone rang again. Ellie, I picked up. They know about the trust, she said softly. I closed my eyes. How? Dad went into a tailspin after the title transfer processed. Started going through bank alerts, probably hoping it was a mistake. He saw the movement, called the bank. The manager wouldn't tell him much, but he got enough. I didn't say anything. They're furious. I mean, I've never seen them like this. Did they say anything to you directly? No. She paused. But they're treating me like a stranger. Mom's been cold. Dad keeps saying things like, this is what happens when loyalty breaks down. I exhaled slowly. You don't owe them a defense. I know. But it's hard, Grandma. I love them. Even when they're like this. I know. Sweetheart. There was a long silence on the line. Then she whispered, did you do it for me? The trust. I did it for me, I said. And I included you because you've always seen me. You've never made me small. Another pause, then quietly, thank you. After the call, I finally listened to Sam's voicemail. He sounded tired, not angry anymore, just bewildered. You didn't have to cut us out, Mom. I don't know what I did that was so unforgivable. But if this is really what you want, then I guess there's nothing left to say. It wasn't unforgivable, I thought. It just wasn't forgettable. There's a difference. I went to the desk, pulled out a notepad, and wrote a letter. I didn't plan to send it. I just needed to write it. Dear Sam, you didn't notice the last time I set the table for you. You didn't notice when I stopped offering. You didn't ask why I went quiet. You just appreciated the silence. You didn't do one big cruel thing. You did 100 small ones. And each time I forgave you without a word. That doesn't mean you didn't owe me one. Love isn't a debt to collect, Sam. But respect is. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done giving myself away. Take care. Mom. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and tucked it in the back of a drawer. Some truths aren't meant to be mailed. They're just meant to be written down, so you can finally stop carrying them. The train pulled out of the station just past dawn. Not a grand departure, no flurry of goodbyes. Just a soft lurch forward and the quiet hum of motion. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a thermos Ellie had handed me at the platform. Chamomile with a splash of honey. Where are you headed, Grandma? She'd asked that morning. South, I said. Somewhere I don't have to explain myself. She didn't argue, just hugged me tight, slipped the tea into my bag and said, send a postcard. The cottage wasn't permanent. Neither was the town. I knew that from the start. I hadn't fled to build a new chapter with a fixed address. I just needed room to breathe without memory sitting on every shelf. So I packed. Light. 2 suitcases, a handbag, and a journal. No photos, no silverware that came in sets, just the things that were mine before anyone else had a claim on me. The train rattled gently. The rhythm of the tracks like a heartbeat I could borrow for a while. Outside the window, trees thinned into fields, fields into towns. Each blur of scenery felt like an exhale. I watched a woman board at the next stop. Gray cardigan, soft linen face, carrying a book with the cover worn off. She sat across the aisle and nodded politely. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. 2 hours in, I opened the journal. Not the kind you keep for drama or poetry. Just a notebook I'd found at the drugstore. Spiral bound. Unremarkable. Page 1 was blank. I wrote, I am not a burden. Then I am not a backup plan. And, finally, I am not sorry. There had been too many years of trying to be small, of shrinking myself so others wouldn't feel crowded, of holding in opinions, stifling corrections, swallowing emotions like they were bitter medicine meant to preserve peace. But peace isn't built on silence. It's built on truth. And the truth was, I had been present for every holiday, every illness, every new job, every slammed door, every meal they forgot to thank me for. I had shown up. I just stopped being seen. Now they would have to live with that absence, not as a punishment, as a reality. When the train stopped in a small coastal town, half cottages, half fog, I stepped off without hesitation. I didn't have a reservation, just a name scribbled on a note from a woman at church who said, You'd like this place. It's quiet and nobody asks questions. She was right. I found the inn, a converted farmhouse with creaky stairs and thick quilts, and paid for 3 nights in cash. The woman at the desk gave me a key without looking twice at my age or my hands or my lack of luggage. Room 4, window facing the sea. That night, I walked along the shore in shoes that weren't practical, letting the water lick at my ankles. No one called my name. No one asked me where I'd been or what I planned to do next. The sky was wide open, and I breathed like my lungs finally remembered how. Back in the room, I sat by the window and wrote one more line in the journal. Leaving is not the same as disappearing, because I hadn't disappeared. I had simply stopped waiting to be invited back in. I stayed in the coastal town longer than I planned. What was meant to be 3 nights turned into 12. The innkeeper didn't mind. She gave me the off-season rate, brought me hot rolls in the morning, and asked only once if I wanted company for dinner. When I declined, she didn't ask again. Some mornings I walked. Some afternoons I sat on the porch with my book, rereading the same pages over and over. Some evenings I wrote, not to anyone, just to name things. Naming had always helped. I wrote about the smell of Walter's old flannel shirt, about the shape of Sam's mouth when he used to laugh without thinking, about Ellie's hands, so like mine, just younger and still unshaken. I wrote about the first time I ever felt dismissed, and the last time I tried to pretend it didn't hurt. And then I wrote about the house, how I'd loved it and how it had stopped loving me back. That was the hardest part to admit because we're taught to believe that places hold our memories like museums. But they don't. They hold them like attics, stacked, dusty, and often inaccessible. And if the people around you stop caring to open the boxes, you start to wonder if those memories ever mattered at all. I had spent too long clinging to rooms that forgot my name. Now I didn't need a room. I needed space. One morning, I went to the post office and mailed a small envelope to Ellie. Inside was a key to a safety deposit box and a handwritten note. For the day you need to start over, not because you failed, but because you refused to stay somewhere you weren't seen. No legal jargon, no explanations. She would find the documents when the time came. The trust would grow slowly, silently, just like the woman who built it. That afternoon, I bought myself a slice of apple pie from the diner near the pier, sat at the counter beside a retired nurse who spoke of nothing but jigsaw puzzles and her stubborn cat. She didn't ask where I was from. She didn't care. She handed me her sugar packet without prompting, and we ate in silence, like people who had nothing left to prove. Later, walking along the rocky edge of the shore, I remembered something Walter once said after a long fight with Sam. One of the only fights that ever made him leave the room. "He's got your stubborn streak," Walter muttered. "Only difference is yours knows when to stop caring what people think." At the time, I thought it was an insult wrapped in a compliment. Now, I knew it was prophecy. My phone rang only once that week. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I had nothing left to explain. Let them wonder. Let them chew on the quiet. My absence was the clearest language I'd ever spoken. And I knew without drama or vindication that none of them, not Sam, not June, would ever find the nerve to ask the only question that mattered. What made you stop waiting for us to understand? Because they already knew the answer. They just didn't think I'd act on it. But I had. Not loudly, not cruelly, just completely. I didn't need them to acknowledge the pain. I didn't need a retroactive invitation back into the fold. I needed to know I could walk away with nothing but a suitcase, a name, and my own story still intact. And I had done it. That night, I stood at the edge of the ocean and said thank you out loud. Not to anyone in particular, just to the wind, just to myself for not giving up. The house sold on a Thursday. Caroline texted to confirm. Funds received. Deal closed. New owners move in Monday. There was no celebration, no champagne, just a cool calmness in my chest, the kind that follows a long delayed breath. Finally, exhaled. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. That afternoon, I took a walk up a narrow hill behind the inn. There wasn't much to see. Scrub grass, a few wind-bent trees, gulls circling lazily above, but at the top was a bench facing the sea, carved with a name I didn't recognize, and a year that had faded to illegibility. I sat there a long time, not thinking, not remembering, just sitting. The sky was wide and overcast, the kind of gray that keeps its promise to stay quiet. No threats of rain, no breaks of light, just enough stillness to notice your own breathing. And I thought, this is what peace is. Not reconciliation, not resolution, just space to be whole again. Back at the cottage, I unpacked the last of my boxes, laid the quilt Walter's mother made across the foot of my bed, hung my robe on the back of the door, arranged the spices I still used. Cinnamon, thyme, a little rosemary from Ellie's bundle, and then I lit a candle. Not out of ritual, but but as a signal, a way of saying, this is mine. This space, this air, this version of my life. I sat at the table with a cup of tea and I finally wrote them back. Not June, not Sam, but Ellie. Sweetheart, the house is gone and I am still here. That's what I want you to remember. We are not defined by the spaces we're allowed into. We are defined by the ones we refuse to shrink ourselves inside of. One day you may find yourself sitting in a room where no one hears you, where your stories are dismissed and your silence mistaken for consent. When that day comes, I want you to know you have permission to leave, to build new walls, to carve new doorways, to go where the air doesn't require apology. I will always be proud of you, not for staying kind, but for staying awake, for knowing when kindness becomes self-erasure. The money is yours, but more than that, the freedom is. Use it wisely, use it boldly, use it with joy. And if anyone asks why you walked away, tell them you were raised by a woman who finally did the same. With love, Grandma. I sealed the letter and placed it beside the teapot. Then I walked out into the evening, the ocean breeze soft against my face, and for the first time in decades, I didn't carry anything with me. No expectations, no burdens, no need to be explained, just myself. Whole. Unfolding like something honest left out in the open, like a truth that no longer feared being spoken, like a woman who left the house and never looked back. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever felt small in a room you once called home, share this. Tell someone. Leave a comment. Let the silence end somewhere. Let it begin with you.